Okay, how do you cope with the differences? I'm sure Catherine could tell us a little bit. Does it make sense?
This is also true of First Nations.
Yes, that's right. We were talking about Asian and we're talking about First Nations. You're right. When I was a psychoeducational consultant for a school board, and I used to go to the reserve, and I have a buddy. She's white, and you know what? They would accept me to do testing, to work in groups, and to talk with parents, and do assessment and intervention for all their learning difficulties. And one day they said to me, "We want you to be here. We don't want her." I mean, it's a big reserve, right? We have to have 2 consultants. And one person said to me, "What does a white woman know about us?" Well, I am not First Nation, but because I guess my face color was closer. You see, when you are in isolation, you have a set of rules, and you feel uncomfortable with people who are different, and also who's going to teach you how to live. I think that is something you need to overcome. And I mean, it is not easy, and they have their own system. But gradually, we are getting into it, and then we move their school. Children, when they finish a certain level, we bring them to our own mainline schools. And it worked out really well. But it takes time. It takes time. Okay. We still have to deal with, we're talking about not just ethnicity as cross-cultural, but even location. And we need to look at how do we share? How do we, solve problems? And sometimes we are what we always say, we're made of the same stuff, right? We are what? Cognitive, emotional, social, and spiritual being. It doesn't matter from what countries, from what culture, coming into a majority culture, we still have to work through within our family, within our school, within our largest society. And that's why it is a big topic. So we're not going to work on that one. And you have the notes. Okay, let's take 10 minutes, okay, for a break. Then we'll go into self-disclosure. Are there any questions before we leave? Does it make sense? It's such a short time to cram so much into it. So if you are interested in this, there are references, and read it up. It's very interesting. Conversations, and this is my privilege to meet with you and interact with you, because you are, experienced people, and you've been in the field, some of you longer than I have, and so you have cases, and it was just so good to hear. So just the afternoon roundtable discussion, I think you will bring up some of the cases that you had success with. Some of the cases, now you're still bothering you. And so that we can share. I think that is very important. And that's what the function of the group is. Now, when we're talking about the collectivistic, individualistic society, in the characteristic of self-disclosure, there's also a difference. You know, collectivistic people do not like to disclose intimate feelings to a psychotherapist. You know, it's hard to get them to talk about how they feel, how about the family. Why? Because they have been brought up, they have been raised, and they have lived within their community, and they share among themselves. And they feel ashamed that they have to go to a psychologist, a psychotherapist, or a counselor. So when they come, they just want to give you what is the tip of the iceberg. This is my problem. Help me solve it. But yes, we will help you solve it, but we need to understand the circumstances and the context of where the problem appears, right? And how the problem came into being. So it is hard for them to talk about it. And especially hard for them to go to a psychiatrist. A doctor is okay. So how do you overcome that? How would you overcome someone who's resistant to get mental health assistance?
Build up a relationship with them.
All right. Build up a relationship. Without a relationship, there's nothing. Sometimes they don't want a relationship because they are drawn to you, then they might reveal something that they wanted to hide. See, a lot of people have so much to hide. So do we. Remember last time we talked about we are entitled to our own privacy, even as psychotherapists, right? So we got to respect them, they could. But when some of the issues that they have affect the quality of life, affects what the problem, involved in the problem they brought up, then we will have to be tenderly, skillfully, strategically get around so that they don't feel that they were, open up too much. Sometimes they open up, they preserve themselves, they protect themselves, but sometimes it's protect others, especially family members. So you got to understand where they are coming from and to overcome. I think lately, mental health had not been blacklisted, right? There are more publicity about mental health. It's just as bad as having a fever or, having an ulcer in your stomach or something like that. They legitimatize it and they said it's not something that is bad about you. We see our ego is very important, isn't it? Anything that intrudes our ego, we need to protect the ego. But now I think more and more recognize that it is a disability, and what do we call it? Invisible disability, isn't it? And I know if you have a wheelchair, because of Paul's sneeze, and this time when we go to Chicago, and we order a wheelchair, and people will help you with the wheelchair. But if you have depression, people stay away from you. Even though your depression is very legit, from where you're coming from, and in your body or hormones or whatever caused it. You see, so invisible disabilities, we got to recognize and we got to say it's okay. But do we have people well trained to help people with invisible disabilities? And we were just talking about, a lot of people don't have the opportunity to learn how to use themselves effectively as a tool for psychotherapy to help clients. All right, now we talk about self-disclosure. When do we use self-disclosure? How do we use it effectively? How does self-disclosure affect us? Because we are private human beings too. And what is appropriate? When I disclose something, is it going to hurt me? How many of you have disclosed to your clients and afterwards you spend more time thinking about what you have disclosed? What does the client receive? And what does the client feel about me now? And how am I going to take it back? And you might have regrets, and you might wish, but why did I say it at the time? Did I do it because of my impulse? Or did I do it because I care? Did I do it because it triggers something unconscious? Like what we're talking about, the triggers in our unconscious mind? What was it? So we go back and we regurgitate. How many of you have done that? Yeah. So then your conclusion is, from now on I'm not going to disclose because it hurt me, right? So I think it's so important. Self-disclosure is a very powerful tool if you do it appropriately at the right time and the right amount, and realizing this is for your client and it is not for me. But when you're doing that and it does trigger something inside you, and that is time to find your peer supervision or your supervisor or your mentor. Because you need to learn when, how much, and for the benefit of the client in self-disclosure. And usually it addresses tension or mistrust because of cultural differences. So it's okay to say, you know what, in my culture this is what I do, but teach me about how you will deal with this problem in your culture. In other words, you acknowledge of your, inadequacy in that area. And we, as we said last time, right, we learn from clients. Not just clients benefit from us, but we learn from our clients. So we have to be transparent, and we have to be honest, and we have to be authentic, right? And he said, you know what? When we're talking about a couple of cases during the break, we're going to share those in our group discussion. But sometimes it's against your culture. It's against your value system. How do we deal with that? But it was perfectly okay in their culture. Are we compromising? Should we compromise? What are our worldview when they are here? We don't want, say for example, a husband abused the wife had the right. Now, how are we going to instill that? It's almost psychoeducational, right? And this is why when we're talking about meaning-centered counseling, it is actually psychoeducational. You educate and you help them so that they build meaningful and discover their own way of building their lives together. And also, when you are disclosing and they feel, she really wants to understand me. Oh my goodness, she is sensitive to how I feel. So sensitivity is very important. And also, some people, I don't know, now we could talk about that this afternoon. Should you tell your clients your qualifications? How much do you want to tell your clients qualifications. If you talk about blah, 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 you kind of intimidate, right? There is a possibility to intimidate, so they be careful what they say because you're so knowledgeable, they're so powerful, you're so famous, you've got to do this and that, right? You never know what the client's saying, right? But then if you don't, they will say, I need to know, how can you help me if you don't have that kind of training? So how much should we disclose? Now that is something that, tell us about your experiences, your successes and your not so successful, okay? And indiscriminate self-disclosure is definitely unhelpful. Now, what do we mean by indiscriminate self?
We talk more about yourself.
We talk about ourselves. All of a sudden, you see, what happened is, if you are practicing, I shouldn't do that, generalizing it, but I mean, if you have seen clients, 7 clients a day, 5 days a week, and you don't get supervision, I mean, the last one, maybe Friday at 3 p.m., you just burst out, you want to talk to someone, and here's a client who's very good listener. And I mean, then it triggers that you say, oh, that's weak. That's very indiscriminate, right? You're not thinking about the client's need because you're so tired, you're loaded, and you've got so much you want to share. All of a sudden you say, oh, this weekend I'm going to... No, that's not very helpful. Right? And do we small talk? I think North Americans like small talk, don't we? Look at, you just...
All of us.
No. Because when you watch TV, I mean, how many shows are just small talk? As if the 24 hours is just, nothing to do, just sit there, right? Goodness. I'm not going to make a channel when you turn it on in 24 hours, and regurgitate everything. You seem so bored. I mean, I think we were educating the young people with iPad, iPhone, and TV, and they just not having discipline. I think we need to regulate ourselves, and we need to have good discipline. It doesn't matter what day of the week, what time of the day, and if you need help, go to your supervisor, your mentor, your peers. And so be clear of your role as a psychotherapist with your client so that your disclosure would be for the benefit of the client. And self-disclosure in cross-cultural is very effective because it'll help you build the relationship with your client. We talk about alliance. That is a key tool to get into the world of your client. And especially when they are racially different, culturally different. And self-disclosure is a positive thing because that means that you are willing to take risk. When they come into you, they risk because they don't know you from, and you are there just as a professional. But in order to share my life with you, I need to know a little bit about your life too. And especially when it is essential to understand the difficulties this person has experienced. So we psychotherapists will take a risk. And when you take risk, you are vulnerable, right? Hey, you're not better than I am, right? But in doing with these issues, they respect you rather than disrespecting you. Because you have a bond. The client, and therapist, there is a bond. Because they will talk to you about things that they will never talk to anybody else, including their partners. So this is why we need to respect the materials that they give to us. And this is why we talk about confidentiality, and so that you earn their trust. But some people have more trusting ability than others. So they were testing you. They would ask you questions. What about you? So you have to be very honest. He said, yes, I do have those experiences, but it's not relevant at this time for this. But I tell you something that I can, that, I have some experience. So I think we all have, to share and say, well, how did you get out of that situation? I think that is very important. And also disclosure demonstrates the therapist's sensitivity and knowledge of their culture. Now, can we learn all the cultures? No, but you could ask them a little bit. And even within a culture, there is an intra-cultural differences, right? And then to complicate that, you have an individual differences into cultural, intra-cultural differences and intercultural differences, and then there are two human beings from all that kind of background together to share. And that is a miracle, isn't it? So this is why we train psychotherapists. What is the shortcut to get to know them? It is building a relationship. What conditions necessitate therapist self-disclosure in the situation? That's what you think about and say, if I share this, now you, of course, when you see a client, your mind works a mile a minute, right? So you look at, when you talk about insight, you look at it and say, okay, does this disclosure will help or not helping? I'm taking the client's time for this, okay? And what issues would this client appreciate or value the therapist's disclosure? Would they, by that time you should know a little bit about the client. The only thing is, if you do that, some clients are so verbal and they become your counselor. Now, is that a good thing? Maybe it is. But that will give you some insight how much your client know about the issue, right? So that is kind of sharing.
They're giving you advice back.
That's right. But you got to be in charge and say, yeah, that's very good. But before we do that, now you were talking about such and such. It is always important to remember you are there for the client. And you could thank them and say, hey, I never thought of that. Thank you.